Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for today's session. We're really excited to be with Amy Kleiner today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself and her a little bit, and then we're just going to give her the time. My name is Leslie Buxton. I am one of the members of the SEA Development Committee, and Kalilu Fofana is on with me as well. We're here to represent the SEA. And just so that you know, throughout this session, we will be monitoring the chat if you have any questions. But the session will go today from 12 to 1 in that Amy will be doing her presentation during that time. And then from 1 to 1:15, we'll be doing a question and answer session. So if you want to go ahead and save some questions or thinking of some questions throughout the session, she'll have time to answer those throughout. So Amy is a licensed psychologist and the Center of CAPS. She's the Assistant Director and Training Director. And she has joined the center staff in 2005 after completing her pre-doctoral internship at CAPS. She earned her PhD in counseling psychology from Indiana University, Bloomington in 2005. She earned her master's degree in counseling psychology from Northeastern University in 2000. Her bachelor's degree is in psychology from Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa. Amy lives in Logan with her husband, 4 daughters, 2 fluffy dogs, and 3 adorable bunnies. Amy, I'll go ahead and turn that time over to you now.
Thanks so much, Leslie. I really appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to the presentation today. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you. Usually, if I give this presentation in a smaller setting or face-to-face, people are more brave to speak up and ask questions, and we have more of a conversational flow. If people are afraid of jumping in via Zoom and are hesitant to do that, our presentation may be a little bit shorter, but I have lots of good information to share with you. And actually, I wanted to, before I even get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about USU CAPS. So USU Counseling and Psychological Services is the primary therapy services option for students at Utah State. And so we serve any undergraduate and graduate students who are enrolled at USU. We are not a direct therapy service for faculty and staff. However, we know that a lot of times you all sometimes can be on the front lines with students, and you might be talking to students, you might have other staff members who are concerned about students and things like that. And I did want to take just a moment to share with you the USU website and how you would find that, because it actually has some nice resource information for you, as well as even information for you or people who are not part of the university if you have some questions about mental health. So if you go to aggiewellness.usu.edu, you will find this website right here. And if you click on mental wellness, that's the CAPS website. Is everyone seeing that okay? You see the website?
Amy, we're just seeing your PowerPoint slides.
You're only seeing the PowerPoint slide. Okay, good to know. Thank you. I am going to share it in a different way then. There we go. Now you can see it. This is aggiewellness.usu.edu. And if you click right here on mental health, then you'll get to our CAPS website. And you'll notice that if you have anybody who needs information about crisis services or immediate help, you'll see that at the very top. But if you scroll down here, you can also learn about our self-guided resources. And if you click on self-guided resources, you'll see that we have some different topics that you can learn about: stress, depression, suicide, anxiety, social anxiety, grief and loss, all of these different topics. Those are free for anyone to browse, and those might be a helpful place. You never know what you can believe on the internet, but if you have questions, even for yourself or people who are outside of the university, this is a really helpful, it could be a helpful resource for you to kind of take a look and get an intro to some of those topics. Additionally, we have workshops that we teach. They're one-time workshops. They're either 60 to 90 minutes. Some of them are already recorded. You can see right here that they're recorded. Any of you can watch those. Then you can also see the next session that's coming up. Those workshops are not open. They're all offered via Zoom, and they're not only for students. They're also for faculty and staff, employees at Utah State. So you can take a look at what workshops we have available, things that you might be interested in. And I wanted to invite all of you to keep those in mind as well. We're happy to have you join us for those workshops. Okay. And are you seeing the full PowerPoint or are you seeing the presenter's notes?
We're just seeing the full PowerPoint now.
Perfect. So we're right where we need to be. All right. Well, today I'm just going to kind of be presenting information. I'm happy for you to ask questions as we go along. Since we're not in the same room together where you could raise your hand and I could easily see it, I can't see all of your faces. And sometimes I don't notice the little Zoom hand that raises at the top of my screen. So please feel free to put questions in the chat or even to say, I have a question when you get a chance. I'd love to see your face and hear your voice as well. So if you'd like to do that, I'm happy to kind of just answer questions as we go like that. But today, the mental health topic that I've chosen to talk to you all about is maintaining health and work-life balance by understanding sort of the connection between our mind, our brain, and our body. And specifically, what I'm going to talk about today is understanding the concept of burnout, the importance of self and health care. And we're going to be talking specifically about an acronym called SEEDS. We're going to talk about understanding work-life balance, and then we'll close with 10 easy stress reduction techniques. So that's kind of what we're going to go over. If you look at this and you're thinking, wow, that's not what I thought this presentation was about, this is a great time for you to just sneak out of the meeting and nobody will even notice. So, but if you're interested, please stick with us. The first thing that I want to talk about is burnout, because burnout is a word that we use pretty loosely. We talk about burnout in a very casual way. You know, I'll hear students and faculty oftentimes say, oh, I'm really burned out from this semester. I can't wait till the semester is over. Or you'll say, you know, I'm burned out from this class, or I can't wait till this project is finished because I'm burned out from it. And that's fine to use that in a casual way. But what we're going to talk about here is more clinical burnout. And if any of you have ever really experienced it, you know it's the kind of thing that once you've experienced it and recognize you're really burned out and how long it kind of takes to get out of that. A lot of times, I know for me, a few years ago, I experienced some pretty severe burnout. And it's such a strong memory for me that I'm like, I never want to go back there. So it helps me learn, it helps me remember to keep my balance and you know, make sure that I'm paying attention and things like that. But let's talk about what clinical burnout looks like. Clinical burnout is physical or mental collapse caused by overwork or stress. It's a state of chronic stress that leads to physical and emotional exhaustion. It can lead to cynicism and a feeling of detachment from your work or your personal life, and oftentimes leads to feelings of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. Some of the symptoms that you might notice for burnout, these are going to overlap with other things. They could be things that are familiar to you if you've ever had anxiety or depression. So if you look and see, I have one of these symptoms, don't panic and say, what? I didn't even know I was burned out. But just it's a combination of these symptoms that might indicate to you that you're in burnout or on your way to burnout. So chronic fatigue, insomnia, trouble sleeping, having more forgetfulness or feeling impaired concentration and attention. I feel like, you know, I have 4 kids, and as I get older, and even like when I was having young children and feeling sleep deprived, that can also lead to forgetfulness and impaired concentration and attention. Physical symptoms such as chest pain, heart palpitations, dizziness, fainting, headaches. Some of that might also look like a panic attack. Increased illness, more than usual. Having a loss of appetite, feeling anxiety, experiencing depression, or feeling anger. So again, not one of those symptoms, but a combination of those symptoms might indicate that you're headed toward burnout, and you might want to think about that. What I'd like to talk about is what are the antidotes to burnout? If I'm heading toward burnout, if I am in burnout, if I've been in burnout, or if I want to prevent burnout in the future, I want to talk to you all about what are the antidotes to burnout? How do we treat it? How do we fix it? So the first thing is self-awareness, recognizing the problem. I think that we can get so busy working and balancing our personal life and our professional life and other things that we have responsibilities for, that sometimes we just keep pushing through, and we might know that we're stressed, but we don't necessarily really recognize, I'm sort of reaching my breaking point now. Things are not going well. I'm getting sick more. I can't sleep, different things like that. And so the first piece is reflecting on some of those symptoms that I suggested prior to this and thinking about, do I think that I need to do something about my stress level right now? Do I think I need to really critically analyze what's going on? And am I headed to burnout right now? The other piece that we're going to spend quite a bit of time on talking about is self-care and healthcare. And we're going to talk about an acronym called SEEDS. So antidote 1, self-awareness, just recognizing the problem. Antidote 2, addressing yourself and healthcare. And then the third is addressing work-life balance and understanding what that means for you. Okay, so 3 antidotes to burnout. We're going to start just by looking briefly at recognizing the problem. Think about this to yourself right now. Do you feel like you're experiencing unexplained fatigue? Not just today, but over a period of time. Have you been experiencing unexplained fatigue? Do you think you're experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression for the first time? You don't really have a history of these symptoms, and maybe there's not been a specific trigger. It doesn't make sense why you might be developing anxiety and depression. It's just kind of showing up, and you don't have a history of that. Do you find yourself feeling more angry, bitter, resentful about going to work or about other things that you have responsibilities for in your life? Have you noticed that you've lost motivation to do things that you usually enjoy? Do you notice that you've been getting sick more often than usual? If you feel like you're on your way to burnout, it's so important to recognize that you can't ignore the signs and just hope they go away. When we talk about burnout in a casual way, like I hear students say, I can't wait for the semester to be over. I'm so burned out. Well, that burnout does get better after you go on vacation or you have a break, right? The thing about clinical burnout is that you take a break and that feels nice. And when you come back, all of it just floods you again, and you immediately go back to that place of feeling anxious, stressed, bitter, angry, all of these different things. And so if you notice that kind of thing happening, that's the kind of thing where you want to stop and say, this isn't going to go away. Stop telling yourself, once my weekends open up, once soccer season is over, once I meet this deadline is over, then it'll get better. It's possible that it won't. And it's important to kind of stop and say, it's time right now for me to do something about this before it gets worse. So that's antidote number 1. Antidote number 2, we're going to look at healthcare and self-care under that acronym SEEDS. So the first thing I want you to think about is, a lot of times we use the term, just like with the word burnout, using casually, we use the term self-care in a really casual way. That word has really been adopted in a popular way so that people are oftentimes talking about how important self-care is. But a lot of times when people are talking about self-care, they really are talking about little things that we do today. So I'm going to go get a pedicure. That's my self-care. Or I like to take a warm bath. I like to have a peaceful walk. I like to watch the sunset. I like to curl up with a good book. And those things are self-care. But what I'm talking about here is more ongoing lifestyle self-care. Okay. And in that sense, how I like to think about it is taking care of your health is your self-care. So I'd like to have you be thinking about self-care more broadly than the more casual use of this little thing that I might do here and there to make myself feel better in that moment, but a more broad picture of self-care. It's also important to recognize that our mind and body are really connected, and you'll see more what I mean by that when we look at this acronym SEEDS and how what we do with our body, what we take into our body, actually impacts our brain health and our mental health. Poor brain health equals poor mental health equals a high burnout risk. So kind of just keep that in mind as we go into this next slide and start talking about that SEEDS acronym.
Amy, we do have a question in the chat
perfect.
really quickly from Tanisha, if you can see that.
That's a great example. Thank you so much, Tanisha. Tanisha asked, how can folks with anxiety and or depression distinguish burnout from their typical anxiety depression symptoms? Thank you so much for that question. There is so much overlap with some of those symptoms that we talked about with depression and anxiety. I think the issue is that you start to notice that it feels different than your regular ups and downs with anxiety and depression, okay? Maybe if you've been struggling with anxiety and depression over time, you've learned ways to cope with it. Maybe you've been in therapy, maybe you're taking medication, maybe you've learned coping skills, and you start to notice those things aren't working the way they usually do. Or my anxiety and depression aren't the only things that I'm struggling with now. My fatigue is unusually high. I'm starting to feel really irritable and resentful and angry about work or about these things in my personal life. Things that just feel really unusual for you. That's where I would say that's how you distinguish, is you start to just notice that it feels different and that it isn't going away. So for example, sometimes you'll take a break and you'll feel better, but you still notice you've got anxiety and depression because those are ongoing. And as soon as you come back to work, everything just floods you and you just feel more exhausted. You just don't feel like you can face it. You feel more fatigued. So I guess that's kind of some of the tips that I would say. And does that answer your question, Tanisha? Okay, great. Thank you. So the antidote number 2 is Seeds of Healthy Life Habits. So Dr. John Arden is the author of a book called Mind, Brain, Gene. That's his most recent publication, but he's actually come out with a number of other publications and self-help books related to understanding sort of neurologically how our brain health impacts us at the chromosomal level and how that then impacts our mental health in a number of ways. So Dr. John Arden is somebody you can actually just put in an Amazon search, and then you'll see a number of his publications. Most of them are not written just for like somebody who's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, kind of at that level. Most of them are accessible for people who haven't been trained in those topics to read about them. In particular, he's got some books related to like seeds and treating anxiety, seeds and treating depression. So if this information ends up being something that sounds interesting to you, just put John Arden in an Amazon search and see if there's anything there that you might find useful. But he talks about the importance of 5 main health habits that improve both our short-term brain functioning as well as our long-term brain health and longevity. And those 5 main health habits, he uses the acronym SEEDS, and it stands for social connectivity, exercise, education, diet, and sleep. And none of those things, I'm sure that none of you are watching right now and your mind is blown like, whoa, I never thought of that. Those are all things that we've heard about, but typically the way that I hear about these things is through my physical health. You need these things for your heart health, for your physical well-being. And what John Arden does is connect this to your actual brain health and your mental health, and how you can think about how to be more clear thinking and have better mental health by thinking of these health habits. So we're going to break these down. Seeds of healthy habits. The first S stands for social connectivity. And all of us know that, social connection seems good. Many of us have learned about depression and learned that when you start to really feel depressed, maybe you start to socially withdraw. And if you've had any experience with depression, you've learned that maybe you want to do things to kind of fight that withdrawal so that you don't completely disconnect from people. But you might not all know that we actually have social brain networks that really need to be fostered and cultivated through our lifetime. And that when we don't foster these social brain networks, people who don't foster them over time tend to have higher rates of depression, have higher rates of anxiety, get sick more often, and ultimately also show higher tendency to develop dementia symptoms earlier in life. Now, any of you out there who are introverts, I'm one of those. I'm sort of like an outgoing introvert. I'm comfortable talking to people, but a lot of times I recharge by being alone. And so I'm not always the first person to initiate lots of social activity. So extroverts who are always initiating, you're thinking, I've got this covered. I'm not going to have any dementia. I'm really good. But the good news is there's not a formula for how much social connectivity you need. Introverts aren't doomed in this area. The idea is that we may all get our social connections in different ways, and some of us may feel a natural need to get it more than others. So it's not like extroverts are lucky here and introverts are. It's just important to recognize that if social connectivity is something that's a struggle for you, to keep in mind that even though you feel like you're an introvert, your brain still has a need to cultivate those social brain networks. And for example, we know that the telomeres, which are the caps on the ends of our chromosomes, actually shrink with loneliness. So social connectivity has multiple benefits to our immune system and to our mental health, even down to the chromosomal level. So when you're thinking about some of the habits that you want to develop to have good brain health, to have good mental health, to prevent burnout in your life, one of the things you can think about is, do I foster social connectivity at all? Do I try to connect with others? And what happens to me when I withdraw socially and disconnect from people? Do I notice my brain kind of getting bogged down? So that's social connectivity. And again, if you have any questions about that, please throw a question in the chat. I'm happy to answer. The E in seeds is exercise. So when we exercise, we receive brain enhancing chemicals that boost our functioning. Many of us have probably heard about this when you've learned about the benefits of aerobic exercise. Most of us know for our heart health, that exercise is important. And many of you have heard that, if you're in a bad mood, go run it off, and it's going to sort of wash out some of your stress hormone. And cardio exercise has a way of doing that. It basically sort of releases brain enhancing chemicals and washes out the cortisol hormone, which is our stress hormone. So exercise and cardio workout, aerobic activity is really helpful for our heart health as well as our brain health. When we don't experience these body enhancing and brain enhancing biochemical processes, our brains can get bogged down. And likewise, when we are really stressed, when we're under a lot of pressure, things like that, exercise is one of the best things we can do to clear out the stress hormone cortisol in our bodies. Now, for me, I've had a really hard time for years and years and years keeping myself on a consistent sort of exercise plan. But even when I am on a consistent exercise plan, one of the things I notice is that when I get stressed out, that's one of the first things that I cut. And yet that's one of the best things that you can keep. If you were going to cut every other good habit when you get stressed out, except for exercise, keep exercise, because it helps to sort of reduce the stress hormone that makes your experience of stress even greater. When we regularly get a 30-minute aerobic boost, all sorts of wonderful brain enhancing biochemical processes occur, including the birth of new neurons in our brain. So exercise is really the best antidepressant and best anti-anxiety agent we have. And I like to clarify this because for a lot of people who experience depression and anxiety in their lives, or they have loved ones that have experienced that, there is still sometimes a stigma about mental health. And sometimes there's a tendency for people to feel like they're being judged by others. Like you should just kind of figure out how to overcome depression and anxiety on your own. And it's not that simple. It's not like we can just will ourselves out of it. And so I don't want to sort of suggest here that exercise is the best treatment. Exercise is the best natural antidepressant and anti-anxiety agent we have. It's also one of the best natural treatments for stress and burnout that we have. That doesn't mean that it's sufficient. And one should never sort of expect that if you're depressed or anxious, you should somehow be more effective at exercising than others, because it is more challenging to do that. But I just want to kind of share that information if you're struggling with burnout, what benefits there are to exercise, not just for your heart health, but also for your brain health. The next E is for education. And education, a lot of times when I'm giving this presentation to college students, they're like, yay, I've got this taken care of, which is true. But education really doesn't just mean getting an education and taking classes. Education refers to exposing your brain to new thoughts and ideas, learning new things, having novel experiences. So our brains actually have a need to learn new things regularly in order to stay vital over time. It's possible that you have read articles in the last few years or even seen little mind games and things like that pop up in social media accounts over the last few years, because a lot of research has been published over the last few years about keeping your mind sharp and preventing like the development of Alzheimer's and dementia later in life. And so some of you may already be familiar with this concept because it has been brought to light more publicly. But learning new novel things builds an infrastructure of brain connectivity for us. And our brains seek new stimuli. Our brains want to be fed. And when you're feeling really bored or stuck with your life, sometimes your brain may be saying to you, please feed me. I feel stagnant right now. And that can really happen when we're in burnout. Because a lot of times when we're in burnout, what's happened is we've sort of become overcome with one particular area in our life. Oftentimes it's work, where we've had some deadlines or things that have sort of taken over our lives. And we're just starting to feel really bogged down. We're experiencing a lot of brain fog. We're not feeling a lot of positive feelings in our lives. We're feeling like we don't really have much left for anything other than work. And so you feel that sort of just like your brain just feels heavy and foggy and like there's not a lot of activity going on. Sometimes people say, I'm just craving something different. I need to shake things up. I need to have something to look for. And sometimes that is your brain saying, I need to be fed with something different. So learning a lot throughout your life does a lot to build your brain vitality. And over time, it actually improves your thinking processes and mental capacity. So another habit or another seed of healthy habit is just trying to learn to experience new things, learn new things, let your mind have novel experiences. Do I have a question? I do. Do you have tips for those who are trying to manage all of their to-dos and must-dos, intense time constraints and exercises? What is chosen to cut out? Is taking a short walk enough to get the exercise benefits? Leslie, thanks so much for that question. I am a very busy mother of 4 that I'm juggling so many things all the time, working full time. I totally relate to the fact that we can't fit it all in. And when I first was presented with this information, initially I felt overwhelmed. Like I kind of tend to jump into all or nothing thinking like I need to do all of this stuff. And there are no areas in these seeds that I have my life under control. So I'm totally screwed. And so first of all, yes, taking a short walk is a great start. It is enough to get those brain enhancing chemicals going. And I've already thought ahead on this, and we will be talking about setting small manageable goals here in just a little bit in the presentation as well. Next is diet. And of course, it's very, very common. I have another question or okay. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. The next part is diet. And we are all familiar with healthy habits in terms of diet for losing weight, living a healthy lifestyle, that sort of thing. But I want to talk a little bit about how diet helps your mental health as well. So maybe some of you had parents or grandparents who would say things like, you are what you eat. But truly, John Arden says we really are what we eat. And our body actually makes brain chemicals based on the foods that we eat or do not eat. And so diet is absolutely fundamental to feeding our brains the good chemicals they need for maintaining positive thought and mental health. In fact, John Arden does a lot of work on treating trauma. And one of his requirements for kind of doing trauma work is starting out not with like the therapeutic goals, but with these healthy habits, because he says that when you're really diving into complex mental health work, that you have to get your brain in a place where it can receive that work to the best of its ability. And so diet is so important to helping your mind be clear and be ready to be elastic and learn and receive new information. Ingesting high amounts of sugars, complex carbohydrates, fried foods, alcohol, smoking marijuana actually can have a degenerative effect on our brains that can impact us in the short term. So I have a sweet tooth, and when I'm stressed, especially when I was like in grad school, I'd be working on something, I would take in huge amounts of sugar. I would have like sugar binges to get me through my stress. And I would have brain fog for a while after I did that. I don't know if anybody else has a sweet tooth and has ever experienced that. But in the short term, diets that are high in these items lead to brain fog, fatigue, loss of motivation, and can also lead to earlier in the long term onset of dementia and other negative consequences in the long term. Now, I don't want to scare you all because everything in moderation, that is always the right way to go about things. It's not like these foods in moderation are going to cause you to have all of these cognitive deficits later in life, okay? It's always important to recognize sort of that none of these things individually or having them here and there in a reasonable amount are going to cause problems for you. But it's important to recognize that they can also hurt you, and that diets rich in nuts, whole grains, fruit, green vegetables, berries, and fish, basically the Mediterranean diet, provide excellent food for our brain and our bodies, and they also boost your mental health. So another thing that you could choose to focus on if you're feeling stressed, burned out, feel like you have high levels of stress in your body all the time. Think about diet, not in terms of, oh, I really need to lose weight or something like that, but just how could I start to add brain boosting foods into my diet more often?
I have a question.
Yes.
So what about if you're already heavy and you're trying to do a diet, but at the same token, it's so hard because you already have your mother's genes or your father's genes that they're already been heavy through the years. And so my mom always tells me, you need to go on a diet. I don't eat much, but how do you fix that? Because that is hard. Because
Is this Alex?
this is Alex.
Well, when your mom is telling you to go on a diet, is she talking about wanting you to lose weight?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, when you talk to dietitians, they will talk to you about how there isn't one ideal weight, and definitely our genes actually impact a lot of our genes impact greatly what our body type is, how easily we gain or lose weight. And I completely agree, Alex, there are limitations to that are at the chromosomal level for us. But this is more talking in terms of, let's not even worry about losing weight. What this is suggesting is not going on a diet per se, but trying to build foods into your daily life that boost these positive brain enhancing chemicals so that we are feeding our brains what we need in order to fight stress and have better mental health. Do you know what I mean? I'm not an expert on how to work with our genes and how to lose weight, but I do know that regardless of what your genes are, having diets that are heavy in these foods do help boost your brain.
So one of the things that I have also recognized is that when trying to do like a diet or something like you're talking about, that you also get depressed because you're trying to do something that you're trying to eat better and things like that. But now it's not that easy because you're depressed, you want to eat more, you eat the wrong foods, and at the same token, basically your mental health on that is not helping either.
Yeah, Alex, I think that just in terms of diet and weight loss, it can be really complicated, and there's so many different ways to go about it. What I can tell you is kind of along the lines of what I was telling Leslie with her question earlier about how do you fit in exercise when you're busy and things like that. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later too when I talk about setting manageable goals. Is for this presentation, I'm not talking about immediately getting rid of all the foods that you enjoy that might not be good for your brain. What I'm talking about is just trying to whatever your diet is now, can you add in some of these brain boosting foods and see if you start to notice a difference? So it's not so much that we're talking about eat only these 7 food categories that I've said, but trying to feed your brain with some of these healthy foods to see if that starts to help you feel a little bit more clear in your mind, starting to help give you more energy, helping you think more clearly, helping you have a sharper mind, that kind of thing.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Alex. Then our final S is sleep. And I'm so lucky because my youngest is now 9. And so I finally have reached the stage of motherhood where I typically can get a decent amount of sleep, which I'm so grateful for. But I went years and years where I was pregnant, having babies and having toddlers, where I rarely got, and I would never get 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And I oftentimes was going on 5 or 6 hours, which my husband would tell you was difficult because I'm grouchy when I'm tired. But so any of you out there who have young children or have challenges with, so many things going on in your life that it's hard to get enough sleep every night, I feel for you. And I recognize that there are life constraints to meeting the ideal goal. Okay. I'm going to share with you benefits for getting enough sleep, and also acknowledge that I know it's hard to reach that goal for many of us, sometimes in different phases of our lives. But sleep. So developing good sleep practices, which means consistently getting adequate sleep every 24-hour period, is actually critical to our mental health. It also actually impacts our brain health over the long term. So getting consistent sleep over the lifetime prevents the development of dementia later in life as well. Good sleep habits can have a significant impact on reducing anxiety and depression. And I don't know how many of you have noticed what happens for you when you are sleep deprived, but many of my students will talk about how when they didn't get enough sleep, they're more sensitive to criticism. They feel more irritable. It's easier for them to be hard on themselves or feel sad or depressed about things. It's easier for them to feel anxious and worried about things. And so sleep impacts us so much in terms of just how we feel on a day-to-day basis. And also, poor sleep habits or irregular sleep patterns contribute significantly to the development of depressive and anxiety symptoms, and also have likewise a negative impact on burnout. So when you think about sleep, they say that teenagers and adults need 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. Maybe that's not possible for you, but you can think about in terms of, are there some ways I can manage my environment to start working to that goal? If I usually get 5, what would it take to get 5.5? What would it take to get up to 6? That kind of thing, so that slowly over time, you're starting to build that habit. And I've got, oh, thank you, Leslie. I think you just look here to see information on how to work with our USU dietitian, Brooke Foster, for nutritional health. Thanks, Leslie. She just put that in the chat. So if you want to learn more about our wellness services at Student Health Center, that's in the chat as well. That's back from diet, so it's a little bit slow to see that. Okay, so those are our seeds of healthy habits, all right? Now, usually what I like to do is let's think about, if you're interested, like if any of this part of the presentation has sounded interesting to you or it's clicked with you, I like to, because I'm a psychologist and I oftentimes don't stop with just giving you the information, I like to have an intervention too. So I like to think about now, would any of you that are out there, and I'm not going to ask you to disclose, nobody has to share anything in front of the group, but would you like to commit to better overall health and building healthy habits that will improve your mental functioning for life? If you're sitting here hearing this information and thinking, yeah, this is interesting, I'd like to start, I want you to think about setting a small manageable goal for yourself in one or more of these categories, okay? And I know for me, the first time I had one of these presentations on seeds was an all-day seminar with John Arden, and he was going into like the chromosomal science and the neuroscience, and it was very easy to get overcome and start thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't start eating salad and exercising every day, I'm going to die. It was really easy to kind of get caught up in that. But I think it's so important to recognize that's never going to be useful to jump in and say, I've got to address every one of these things and get perfect. So I always start with, what is a small manageable goal in a category? So for example, social connectivity. Would you consider doing something like put down your phone, Stop texting somebody and just give them a call. People might be freaked out for a second, like, I can't believe you just called me. My kids say nobody calls anybody anymore. I can't believe you would suggest I call them. But what would it mean to just pick up the phone and talk to somebody? Because the social brain connectivity that happens through talking with somebody is much greater than just through texting and writing, okay? But maybe if you're thinking social connectivity and that's a goal that would be manageable to you, write down something that you'd like to do in that area that's manageable for you, that doesn't feel overwhelming. For exercise, so Leslie mentioned earlier in the chat, could I just have a short, brief walk? That's exactly what John Arden encourages people to do. He says, exercise, start by walking briskly to and from your car. Would that be a goal you could set? For me, when I say I'm gonna get a gym membership and I'm gonna go to the gym 4 times a week, that lasts for maybe a couple of weeks before something happens where I can't go, and then I get out of the habit. And so if that's true for you too, think of something small that you could do that really doesn't take extra time. And walking briskly to and from your car actually saves time. So thinking about a manageable goal like that, where you start developing a lifestyle around aerobic exercise. Next, education. Try something new. Do you want to try something new once a week? Do you want to play some sort of like a puzzle, or trying something new, getting out of your comfort zone? Anything like that stimulates that brain connectivity related to just having novel stimuli and novel experience. Maybe you're thinking diet is something I'd like to address. So instead of thinking about all the things in your life that you're not eating, or that you're eating that you think are bad and unhealthy, don't even worry about that. I'm not asking you to take anything out of your diet right now. I'm just suggesting that in addition to what you're already doing, could you try to add one new healthy food in your diet each week? I'm going to start eating a handful of nuts every day. Once that gets down, maybe I'm going to add an apple to the nuts, that kind of thing, where you're really not worrying about the deficit side of it, but you're just adding into what you're already doing. So thinking about, is there a diet goal that you might like to set? And then finally, sleep. If you're not naturally getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep, is there a goal that you'd like to set for a bedtime where you make that a priority and you say, even if I'm not done with everything in the night, I'm going to really try to stick to this bedtime? So maybe just kind of take a moment to think about that and write and just jot it down. Any of those sort of small manageable goals that you might like to set for yourself that don't feel like they'd be overwhelming on top of all of the other to-dos that you have.
So I have a question.
Yes, Alex.
So on the social, on the first one, asked, how do you manage that with kids? Because if we have phones in the home, and you're trying to get their attention, and half of the time that you're asking them a question and they're on their phones, how do you as a mother or as a father help with that? Because sometimes I have a hard time, like, dude, I'm trying to talk to you, but I know you're still on your phone. What would you suggest?
Alex, that's a great question. I'm going to tell you a couple of ideas, but to be honest, everybody here who is a parent probably has other ideas and probably would also say this is a challenge for them as well. I mean, the hard part is that the phones, they give us like a dopamine drop. It's like when you're on them and you're getting like a quick response, it's very reinforcing. And our kids are probably like, my kids witness me being on my phone and being distracted a lot too. So already I'm not setting a good example for them. And then I'm asking them to pay attention to me, even though sometimes I'm not paying attention to them. So it is a challenge for sure. But I think that maybe one way to go about that is to just sort of have a reset button in your home where you have certain requirements or sort of, I don't know, policies or expectations in your home around screens. So maybe I had one parent tell me that they're not allowed, none of their children are allowed to have their phones in a private space. They can't have it in their bedroom. They can't have it in a room by themselves. They can have it only in the public space in the home. And that it has to be docked at the charging station at a certain time every day. So everybody is across the board off their phones at certain times during the day. Sometimes in our home, something that we're working on and we're not always consistent with, but something we're trying to work on is kids can't get on their phones until they have checked off the expectations we have in terms of you've got to take care of your pets and pack your lunches and do your chores and that kind of thing. So I think, Alex, it's a great question. We're all challenged by it, but I think it starts with you and your partner kind of just trying to say, what do we need to do to get our kids' attention? And do we need to reduce the amount of screen time they have so that they're not always distracted by it? And so that they learn to talk to other humans. Sometimes I walk on campus. The other day I walked on campus, I walked outside and there was a group of 6 college students standing in a circle. It was almost like they were doing some kind of seance or something, because they were in a circle, but none of them were talking to each other. They were all looking at their phone. And I was like, what's happening here?
Good, thanks.
Thanks, Alex.
Hey, Alex, that was a great question. Something that we do in our family, we all meet with the kids. We set times. Okay, how many hours should you be allowed to be on the phone? So we work on it together. And then we have apps that we use. So we have control over the phone. Okay, after they use up their limits, the phone automatically locks itself. So they won't be able to use it. So that's been very helpful for us.
Thank you so much for that example. I appreciate that. We are going to move into antidote number 3, which is work-life balance. And I want you to think about this idea of what do you think of, I'm not going to ask you to say this, just be reflecting on it. What do you think work-life balance is? Do you know anybody in your life that has it? Is there somebody around you that you can emulate? Or is it sort of something you're going to have to do to blaze your own trails because everyone around you is also working themselves crazy? Would you like to have more work-life balance? And what does it look like for you? Because it can look really different for different people. Sometimes people say, well, I want to be able to not ever work outside of my 8 to 5 work day, and then I want to be home and have leisure and be with my family outside of that. For other people, if they have a job that brings a lot of meaning to them, that they feel kind of like a calling, or it brings a lot of purpose to them, then taking work outside of those work hours might not be imbalanced for them. So you really have to think about, what does it look like for me? Is it important for me? Okay. And some of the questions that I ask people to reflect on is, what is your identity? If you're thinking, okay, I need to get more work-life balance, but I'm not sure what to do. Some of the questions that I recommend people think about is kind of, what do you think your identity is outside of your primary role at your job? What do you currently do to develop that identity in your life? Or do you do anything to develop that? What are the 3 things that you most enjoy doing? What are the 3 things you actually spend most of your time doing? And most of us aren't lucky enough to sort of have jobs where the 3 things we most enjoy doing are only at work. So we're spending a ton of time doing it. So it's okay if those 2 things aren't in balance. It's just a question to reflect on. What percentage of your time do you spend doing the top 3 things you enjoy most? What are 5 ways you'd like to think of yourself? Sort of adjectives that you would use to describe your ideal self? Does your ideal self match up with the way you live day to day? What are your 3 most important life values? What are you currently doing to promote those values? And what things, if any, get in the way of making these values a priority? So we're not going to spend time kind of like doing this and then discussing it today, because we don't have the longer time that it would take to do that. But if you're thinking, I want to create more work-life balance and I'm not quite sure how to do it, sometimes these are some reflective questions that you can think about to start to get at the core of, what would it take for me to have more balance? What's going to get in the way of that? And what kind of specific goals do I need to set to kind of start to move towards that? Okay, so just some other questions in terms of work-life balance and determining if you do feel balanced. Do you ever feel like your life is on hold until, like you say, well, once I meet the next deadline, then things are going to be better. Once the semester ends, once my kids graduate from high school, once soccer season is over, whatever, then everything will be better. If you find yourself doing that all repeatedly for months and years, and those deadlines pass, that semester ends, the next milestone occurs and it still doesn't feel like your life de-stresses at all, then you might want to think, wow, I need to stop and be more intentional about the way I'm developing work-life balance. Is there one thing you'd really like to be different in your life in the next year, let's say? Would you like to set a small, manageable goal for yourself right now regarding your work-life balance? If you're feeling like, yeah, I put things on hold all the time and it's time to start thinking, hey, I could be intentional about work-life balance right now. I want something to be different in the next year. Here's what it is. Just take a moment to jot down maybe a small goal you'd like to set for yourself regarding finding more balance in your life. And it's just the first step of many, just a baby step, but take a moment to think about that and maybe write it down. The next thing I want to talk about is burnout and perfectionism. And perfectionism can be related to work-life balance because people who struggle with maladaptive perfectionism oftentimes waste a lot of time procrastinating and avoiding, and also oftentimes take a lot longer to do things than it needs to take because of this urge to make things flawless. So that's why I like to talk about perfectionism as well. So let's look at what is perfectionism. Perfectionism often refers to a person's strong desire to be perfect or without flaw. Sometimes it can be viewed generally positive or desirable trait. However, a true perfectionist or somebody who has maladaptive perfectionism has a personality that strives for flawlessness in everything they do. Perfectionists often accomplish that by fixating on imperfections, being highly controlling in situations, working very hard, or being critical of themselves and others when things are not flawless. So, while striving for perfectionism is not considered a mental health disorder, it's not a diagnosis, but research on mental health has actually linked maladaptive perfectionism to a variety of mental health problems such as anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and disordered eating. So perfectionism frequently appears to kind of take a negative toll on one's mental health and sometimes on one's interpersonal relationships. I got a question in the chat. Oh, no, I don't have a question in the chat. So something that I throw out here is a work-life balance and perfectionism, sort of a self-test for perfectionists. So if you kind of look at some of these questions and think that more than 4 of these relate to you. So I place excessive demands on myself. Others would describe me as a perfectionist. I often obsess about the details of a task, even though it may not be important. I am annoyed when others don't act or behave as well as I do. For example, being on time, keeping order, and so on. I am very organized in one or more areas of my life. I get very upset with myself if I make a mistake. I often have a mental list of things I should be doing. I never seem to be doing enough. I tend to notice any error in myself or others before I notice the positive. I have an all or nothing philosophy. If I can't do it all or do it well, why bother? I am devastated by criticism. I have difficulty making decisions. Now, all of us surely have at least one of these things that sounds like us, okay? But like I said, if you check 4 or more, you probably are stressed more than the average person, and it might be because you have some perfectionistic tendencies that are causing unnecessary stress for you. So just to throw in a couple of treatments for perfectionism, there are 3 things that we tend to focus on in terms of addressing perfectionism. If you feel that your perfectionism in some ways can become maladaptive for you, okay? Those 3 things are self-compassion, psychological flexibility, and mindfulness. Now, those are all very psychology jargony words. So I'm just going to try to explain those to you a little bit. Right here, under practicing self-compassion, I have 3 resources here. And by the way, I know you can't get to these right now in this presentation, but I did create a PDF with all of the resources that I've discussed in this presentation. You'll all get those if you haven't already, and then you can click those links directly so you can go to them and use them or learn more about them. Right here, though, under practicing self-compassion, there are 3 articles that are sort of mainstream psychology articles that talk about self-compassion being an antidote to perfectionism. And the idea about self-compassion is really about learning to challenge the thoughts and the expectations that you might have of yourself, that things need to be just right, that they have to be perfect, sort of the ways that you criticize yourself or others. Self-compassion helps you just take the edge off that tendency and start to kind of give yourself permission to look at things in a little bit more flexible of a way. All right. This next thing is called ACT Guide. And ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. ACT is a therapy that's used for a number of mental health issues: anxiety, depression, OCD, eating disorders. So there's, I mean, almost anything. It's a general approach to therapy. But ACT Guide is a program. And tell me, when I click on this, is it sharing that website with you, or are you still, it is sharing that website? Okay, excellent. So this is a program offered by USU because we have faculty in our psychology department that are actually doing a lot of research on acceptance and commitment therapy for treating anxiety, OCD, and perfectionism. And they have created a self-paced program that you can actually use yourself for a number of different issues. But why it's really helpful for perfectionists is because ACT focuses on developing psychological flexibility. So oftentimes when we're struggling with mental health issues or perfectionism or procrastination, it is oftentimes because we have a kind of a rigid or black and white way of thinking about how something has to be done, and it gets us stuck. It doesn't allow us to be fluid. And so ACT in general as an approach really helps to build that psychological flexibility, and psychological flexibility is an antidote to perfectionism. So something to think about. USU students get to have this program for free, but you all can have it for just $10, and you just access it at this website. If you don't even want to click on the resource sheet that I gave you, you can just go to the USU website and put in the general search ACT Guide, and it will pop up with this website. So that is something to kind of look at if you're interested in doing kind of some self-help work. And then mindfulness is mindfulness is a concept that's used a lot related to just helping us get out of our distracted minds. Our minds tend to wander. We have a lot of distractions. Earlier, Alex was talking about, kids on the phone being distracted and things like that. And mindfulness is a practice of learning to relax your body, breathe, clear your mind, learn to develop the discipline in your mind to bring your focus back to the moment instead of allowing yourself to get caught up in the distraction. So mindfulness is incredibly helpful with treating chronic pain. It's also very helpful in treating anxiety as well as perfectionism. It's a great practice for burnout. And this app, Stop, Breathe, and Think, it offers a free version, or you can pay for the premium version. I think the free version is excellent. And it's a great app to sort of start to learn to practice your own skills in reducing stress and anxiety. And I'd like to take a moment right now to do a 3-minute breathing exercise with you. So I'm going to click on this, and we're going to just do this together. For some reason, when I click on YouTube, it doesn't want to let me go directly to the link anymore, but I know how to get right to it. So what I want to do right now is, this is actually an example from the Stop, Breathe, and Think app. This is just a mindful breathing exercise. So this is one of the just more general skills that the app offers. But I'd like to encourage all of you that are still with me and not completely bored to tears by all of my talking over the last hour to take a moment to just listen and follow along to this 3-minute mindful breathing activity.
Close your eyes and rest your hands
and are
on
you
your
seeing
knees.
and hearing that?
Bring your attention to the touch of your body on your seat. Feel the weight of your body on your chair or cushion. Make sure that your back is straight and that you're comfortable. Take a few deep breaths. While you're breathing deeply, relax your shoulders, your stomach muscles, the muscles in your face, your hands, and your legs. Let go of all the tightness in your body. Now bring your attention back to your breath. Notice what it feels like as it enters through your nose, goes down through your throat, filling your lungs, and back out through your nose. Notice your stomach and chest rise and fall each time you breathe in and each time you breathe out. And just allow your breathing to be natural and relaxed. Now bring your attention to the feeling of your breath in your nose. Feel your breath as it comes in and goes out. Just focus on this sensation, paying attention to each time you breathe in and each time you breathe out. As you inhale, maybe your breath feels cool. And as you exhale, maybe it feels a little warmer. When your mind wanders, or if you become distracted, just notice what's going on in your head, and then gently bring your attention back to your breath, going in and out. Focus on the feeling of your breath and allow thoughts and feelings to come and go in the background. Now gently bring your attention back to the touch of your body on your seat and open your eyes.
Okay, so thank you so much for participating in that. For those of you who did that, we can talk about that experience here during the question and answer time, but my last slide is just some 10 easy steps to reduce stress. I wanted to just sort of add to just this idea that we can pick manageable goals that are easy to do. We don't have to take everything on. So 10 easy steps to reduce stress and improve brain health. Download the Stop, Think, Breathe app that we just practiced. Get 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Start by setting a bedtime and trying to stick to it. Watch the stress and wellness workshops online. So this is also something, so when you go to the Utah State University, the Aggie Wellness website that I showed you, and you go to the self-guided resources that I was mentioning, we actually have a 6-part stress management website or workshop series. There's 5 videos there that you can watch. There's a worksheet right here that you can follow along, and that can be your own self-paced sort of study if you want to learn some more anxiety management tips. Eat some brain boosting foods. Try to add 1 new food each week. Engage in aerobic exercise. Best time for a brisk walk is right after you eat. So can you take a 10-minute walk briskly around campus right after a meal during your lunch break? Color, paint, build, write, do something creative. Do something you enjoy each week. Prioritize social connectivity. Reach out to a friend even if you're busy. Reduce screen time. Maybe think about reducing your social media exposure, for example, and call someone you haven't spoken to for a while. So this is the workshop sheet that you'll be getting from Leslie. And that's the end of my presentation. I'd love to open it up to questions or even reactions to the mindfulness activity that we practice together. Anyone have questions, thoughts, comments?
It's me again.
Yeah, hi, Alex.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So what do you do when you have like a mental breakdown at work and you don't want to talk to nobody and you're trying to figure out things? How can you self-control yourself or mind your thoughts? What do you do?
Well, Alex, I don't have a single answer to you, but I do think that that is a really big piece, that sometimes when we are at a high level of stress, we have times in our life where we can't deal with that stress because we have to be at work, or we're driving a car, or we're giving a presentation or something like that. And I think that's where learning to just have a quick mental timeout is a really important and helpful skill to have. So, practicing some of the mindfulness skills on that stop, think, breathe app, there are some really brief skills on that you can start to learn. But even more so, that link that I shared with you about the stress and wellness workshops on the USU CAPS, there are some really quick, like, breathing and relaxation techniques, progressive muscle relaxation, something that we call box breathing, a number of different things like that can help you sort of in the moment when you can't just leave work and have the rest of the day off, but you could take a 5-minute time out, go to the bathroom or something, and kind of do some things that help clear your mind until you can come back later to the stressors that you're needing to think about. So I would recommend kind of looking into some of those things and see if some of those skills you could start practicing and they would be helpful for you for those mental timeouts that you need. Any other questions or thoughts?
Hey, Amy, thank you so much for the great presentation. It was very informative. So going back to the question that Alex just asked, let's say, what if an employee has a mental breakdown and you are the supervisor or the manager? What do you do to help the employee?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked that, because sometimes when people are in a really high level of maybe anxiety or distress, and maybe they're having something of a panic attack, where they're sort of like having a purely emotional experience. Their heart is racing, they might be crying, or they're feeling a lot of stress. A lot of times what we want to do is, our natural instinct is to try to talk somebody out of it. It's okay, you're okay. And maybe that's, if that's working in the moment, then that means that they're still mentally present and processing that. And so that's great to just kind of check in with them. Are you okay? Do you need somebody to talk to? Do you need to take a break? Let them have a 10-minute break to kind of just cool off. But for people who are struggling to do that, and maybe are currently having like a panic attack, what happens is the thinking part of our brain, the frontal cortex, the frontal lobe, that's responsible for orienting us to time and place, is responsible for helping us make decisions and think through things and think about our coping skills. That actually goes offline. And what's happening is our body is getting rushed with cortisol hormone and sort of this panic response, so that your brain can't actually access that. And in that case, what we want to do is help somebody with grounding, help them just kind of come back to reality. Anybody can do this. I've actually read I've seen this in TV shows. I saw this on a Hallmark Christmas movie. Somebody did this. It's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And some of you maybe have heard of it. One of the best ways you can help somebody who's really feeling like they're having a breakdown and they can't feel like they get it together and they don't want to be alone or something like that, is you help them think through the 5 senses. So the first thing is, look around and describe 5 things that you see. Then after that, listen and tell me 4 things that you hear. And after that, say 3 things that you can feel with your skin. And then 2 things that you can smell, and then describe 1 thing that you can taste, just whatever your mouth tastes like. And that alone, oftentimes, and you don't have to be a trained professional to do that. Just say, can you stick with me and do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? That helps people sometimes get grounded, and they can take some deep breaths and kind of come back to the moment. So that's like a quick skill that I can throw out there that anybody can do.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for coming to this presentation. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, well, please know that you can always reach me at USU CAPS. If you do have any questions or follow up after this that you didn't feel comfortable sharing with the group, I would be happy to hear that. I know the recording of this will be shared with you, and those resources that I've shared will also be shared with you. So thanks so much for coming to my presentation today. I appreciate the the audience, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.